Today's going to be a good day, amen? We have, I'm going to be in Joshua 3, if you want to turn into Joshua 3 with me. Last week, I talked about some things, and during the transition, and I started to read about that same story I had talked about last week. I talked about Joshua in the transition time. I talked about Joshua and him about to go into the promised land. How many of you remember that? There's a couple things that happened before he went to the promised land. I mentioned that Joshua looking over the whole land looked bigger than what Joshua could actually conquer. How many of you ever been in an area of your life where you thought, I don't know how this is going to work? Again, that should have been, man, I've been there. I may just be in a church full of overcome and victorious people, and that's okay with me this morning. But I've been in parts of my life as a pastor where I looked over the situation, I looked over what was needing to happen, and I just didn't feel like I was equipped. I didn't feel like I was good enough, worthy enough, had it all together enough, had the right tools, had the right experience, and I was about to step into something, and God saying, hey, it's all yours. And I'm like, well, how is that going to work? The first city they came up with was Jericho. They used to have chariot races around the top of that city. I mean, and you're out there with a bunch of people who are not used to warfare. And God said, hey, go ahead. I've given you this land. And I told you that sometimes it takes in that one moment. Sometimes it takes that one step of faith. And sometimes it takes day by day, just trusting God that he has what you need. So today we're going to talk about what happened even before Joshua went into the land. They're about to cross over the Jordan River. And so I started thinking about some things that needed to happen before Joshua even stepped foot into the promised land. Are y'all with me this morning? Is this okay? Some of you, I was thinking about some things. I know some of you are getting close to retirement. Some of you are saying amen. But how many of you know that even when you get closer to retirement, as a Christian, you never retire? How many of you know in America, we're really the only country that you retire from a job? Most people keep working, doing something. And so, but some of you are in a situation, you may be trying to open a new business, you may be trying to do a new family venture, you may be thinking about something, planning something, God's been talking to you about something, and you just don't know how it's going to work. Today, this message is for you. Next week, I'm excited about my message for next week. Come back next week, you'll have to see it. I'm not even going to tell you about it, you just have to come. But I'm excited about that one. I could actually preach it this morning, too. Y'all may get a 2-for-1, like a double hitter. Some of you are like, please don't, please. So it says that Israel crosses the Jordan. It says, then Joshua arose early in the morning, and they set out from Shittim. And they came to the Jordan, he and all the people of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest. What did the Ark of the Covenant represent? The Spirit of the Lord, his presence, whatever you want to put in there. Well, I guess I'll take that back. Not whatever you want to put in there. It is the presence of God or the Spirit of the Lord. As soon as you see the Ark of the Covenant and the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. What were they supposed to follow? Here we go. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. It says, do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. God had already promised a place to them, a land to them, and yet they had never been that way before. The only people that had even seen that land were the 12 spies. Joshua and Caleb were the only two of those guys who were left when they were about to cross over. 10 of them passed away with that generation before that. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But so that nobody had been that way before. They said, so you don't know where you're going, so you're going to have to trust me. Some of you today are thinking, man, I don't know where I'm going, God, but I am going to trust you. Do not come near in order that you may know which way you should go, for you have not passed this way before. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. How many of you love for God to do some wonders among you? We're going to get into this in a minute. And Joshua said to the priest, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. We're going to read just the rest of this chapter here. Then the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that you may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priest to bear the ark of the covenant. When you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. And Joshua said to the people of Israel, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will, without fail, drive out all before you, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Gashashites, whatever you want to say. You add whatever word and pronunciation you want there, the Amorites and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord on the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan. Now, therefore, take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, each tribe a man. And the Lord, and when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord and the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off. Almost done. Here we go. From flowing and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priest bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priest bearing the ark were dipped into the brink of the water. Now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest, and that's what season it was. It wasn't just the normal river, but the Jordan, it was not just in the original place the Jordan uses to flow, but it was outside of the banks. I don't know if you've ever seen the Mississippi River or anything like that, or during a flood stage or things, or something that usually runs in a certain way, but the water was everywhere outside of the banks. How many of you know if you're going to cross a river, this probably wouldn't be the time to do it? I'd be waiting for the drought to happen, you know what I'm saying? Something ankle deep. God doesn't want you to do that. That'd be too easy. You could get glory from that. Isn't everything that God gives you is always going to be way bigger than what you have and what you are and who you are? Any great dream that God has for you in your life, it's always going to be bigger than who you are. Usually that's how I know it's from God, is because I'm like, I can't do it by myself. I can't even do it with another human. It's going to take God. The water's coming down from there above and stood and rose in a heap far away. Almost as he did with the Red Sea, but instead of splitting it, he made the waters, I could see him. I don't know if he used his foot or his hand or whatever he did. He may just use the wind. I don't know what he used, but can you just see him just pushing that water back? For him, that's easy. For us, that's a miracle. But for him, he's just, oh, watch this. He went, I don't know how he did it. He went and just, but he did it. Any of you care how he did it? Some of you care how he does it, though. Let me just stop right here. Some of you care how he does it, because some of you want him to do it without you having any faith. Some of you want him to do it in your own terms and in your own way. And God said, no, I don't do it like that. If it was us, some of us would try to build some rafts and a barge and go back and forth with the people. He said, no, you're going to walk around on dry land. It rose up in a heap very far away. I think this is funny. This is a whole other sermon. At Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those flowing down towards the sea of Araba and the Salt Sea were completely cut off. And the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now the priest bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all nation finished passing over the Jordan. Now let's talk about that past generation that never crossed over into this, what we're talking about in this story, to the promised land, that past generation. Let's talk about some of their things that they didn't get right, and the reason they never did pass over. The reason they didn't pass over is because they had a whole lot of baggage they were trying to bring with them. They had a whole lot of, we could see that those spies that I talked to a while ago, the reason they didn't even enter the promised land until 40 years later is because of those spies gave an evil report saying it's too big. They were men and women without faith. They were men and women who looked at the problems in the situation and said, that's too big for my God. I said it last week, nothing is too big for our God. But through our perception and things, we will see, and the enemy will try to lie and saying, you cannot do this, you cannot pass, you cannot go any further in your life. Some of you, God's wanting to take to a new level spiritually. He's wanting to take you to a new level in your physical body, and maybe your business, your home, your marriage, your whatever it may be. He's wanting to take you to a new level, and you're thinking, well, you don't know what I've been through. And I'm saying, I don't care what you've been through, but he knows what you've been through. It's not too big. They had a bad report. They looked through the eyes and everything that God did, even the miracles that they were asking for food, so he brought food to them, but then they didn't like the birds that he brought. I like quail. But even when he did do a miracle amongst them and gave them what they needed, it still was not good enough for them. He said, I have something that's promised, a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to provide for your needs right now, and then I'm going to give you more than what you ever desired or what you could even imagine. Grapes that they put on a pole to carry to I mean, can you imagine this land that the giants were living in and their house? Imagine going into a land that somebody already built your house for you. All you have to do is go and occupy it. Have you ever thought of it like that? They had cities that they did not even have to build. All they had to do was walk in and take possession. They didn't have to even lift a finger for what God had for them because he had already built it for them. Some of you, he's asking you to have faith because he's already put in possession of what you need. He's already built what that you've been praying for. He already has it in his possession. He's saying, take inhabitant of it. And yet we see some of those things, we're thinking, I don't know if I can obtain this because I see the giants in the land. I see this kind of things, and I just don't know. So we're going to talk about some things this morning that Joshua he did it the right way. Here we go. See, sometimes I'm going to talk a lot about the priests this morning. But Joshua, before he even started, they camped, and for 3 days they waited, and there's a few things that had to happen, but sometimes, let me just tell you this, just like those priests were the first people, then sometimes you just have to put your foot in the water. Everybody say, I want to put my foot in the water this morning. You don't have to put your foot in the water, but you're always going to stay where you've always been. You're going to wonder, not just wonder physically, but you're going to wonder in your mind what could have been. You're always going to have that thought in your mind, if I'd have done it this other way, if I'd have put my full trust in God, if I'd have surrendered my whole life to God, what could have been? You're always going to have that thought in your mind, man, I could have done so much for God. I could have done so much more in my life. But you're going to have to put your foot in the water. You have to put your foot in the water. We told you before that the river was at flood stage. They could have been swept away. Nothing. Let me just get into this. Those priests had to carry the what? The Ark of the Covenant, which represents what? They had to carry, before they even stepped into the promised land, God has said, hey, I want my presence to go before you. He said, I want my presence to go before you. How many of you would have liked to have been a priest at that one moment? The river's rushing. It's not like one of those calm things where you get your hammock out and you lay by. I mean, this is a rushing river outside of the banks. And their job is this. They're supposed to trust that when they step into the water, that they're going to cross over on dry land. The back priests, those poles were pretty long if you ever read about the Ark of the Covenant. Those back priests, they're thinking, I'm okay. I got 12 feet almost before that first priest gets washed away. I'm dropping it and I'm going. God can take care of himself. Tell me you wouldn't be thinking that. And God can take care of himself. But that first priest, I want you to imagine this picture here. They had the ark on poles. And he's carrying the presence of God. And he's got to just take a step. Now, most of us, we want the presence of God in our life, but not to the point of total surrender to his presence. I want to show you that picture again. He's holding this one pole, the ark that's made out of gold, by the way, overlaid with gold. And I don't know about you, but you have to use both hands, you would think, to carry that pole. And he's got to step into a place that he cannot see. Remember, this water's outside of the bank, so you've all stepped into a river bank or a creek or something. If you haven't, you need to take your shoes off one day and do that. But you just don't never know what you're about to step into. You don't know how deep. That first step may be okay, but that second step may be a doozy. You know what I'm saying? And your only job is to carry his presence, to go somewhere that you've never been. Can you imagine that most of us want to have something in our hand to steady ourselves? And God's saying, you don't need anything else to steady yourself because you have my presence. You don't need another crutch in your life. You don't need that relationship in your life that I told you that you don't need. You don't need that. It's not about your money. It's not about your things that you've placed your trust in. It's all about you just trusting me by holding my presence out, and I'm about to do things you've never seen before, but you're going to have to put your foot in the water. You have to do something that's totally uncomfortable for you. It's totally out of your personality. It's totally out of what all the things that you've all these insecurities and things that you've had. It's totally out of all those things, out of your fear and your anxiety. It's something that's totally against your character. And you say, you know what? Your biggest job right now is to carry my presence and take a step. See, Joshua was promised the promised land, but he knew that unless his presence went first, if God's presence went first, it was going to fail. It was going to fail. Joshua was sitting back on the bank saying, priest, get after it. But he knew if the presence didn't go before him, he said, whatever Joshua would have put his hands to across that Jordan would have fell. They had nothing to steady themselves but the presence of God. They couldn't worry about falling and catching themselves because their job was to hang on to the presence. Their job description was to lead, to carry the presence of the Lord into the area God called you to. You don't know how it's going. You don't know all the things that you want to know. You don't know the circumstances. You can't see beyond some things. It may be a little unstable. It may be a little shaky. There's probably a lot of uncertainty. It would be easier for God to make a path before you went. He could have He could have, because he's God, he could have heaped that the Jordan River up, and then they could have walked across, but that would have not taken any commitment or faith on the part of the Israelites. See, God's always willing to do his part, but he always wants us to do our part too. Sometimes before God will react or God acts or God's working in your behalf, he's already worked out the details, but it's going to take us having faith to step out first. To go somewhere, like I said, we've never been before, do something that's not comfortable for us. You know, I preached a message not too long ago, and I just want to, well, it's been a few years back. But sometimes we rely on our logic and what we see and how we feel instead of what God's asked us to do, is to rely on his presence. In Matthew 17:20, I'm going to go to that message I spoke a few years back. It says, he said to them, because of your little faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. I asked myself a few years back when I preached that message, I said, why did God use a mountain instead of a gorge or a valley or different other things? Why did God use a mountain in this case when it comes to faith? The reason that God used a mountain, I believe, in this scenario is because if you could see on the other side, it wouldn't take faith at all. The reason he used something as big as a mountain is because you can't see where he wants to take you, so you have to have faith that he's going to willing to move that mountain out of the way. But if you could see on the other side, it wouldn't take any faith at all. The reason he puts mountains in our way sometimes, he said, do you believe that I have what you need on the other side? For him, the mountain's just something he created with his words. For you, you're thinking it's an immovable object, a thing that's holding you back. And for him, he's saying, what's a mountain to me? I crush it with my hand, I'll take it up, scoop it up with anything. But for us, it's our faith that moves those mountains. Because the mountain can't be moved unless we're willing to say, God, I'm willing to take the steps for you to move that mountain. You have to pray, step, and believe that whatever God has for you is worth the risk. It's worth the discomfort. It's worth the uncertainty. So, Pastor John, what I do, I have some things I want you to write down, scribble down, write on your hand. I don't know, just don't wash it before you get out of here today. Here we go. Number one, you need to listen for what your part is. After God shows you what you're supposed to do, I believe every person in this room, if you're really seeking God, he'll show you what you're supposed to do. But I want you to listen to what your part is. In this scripture that we just now read, their part was, I want you to step into the water. I want you to go inhabit the land. I've already given it to you. I've already doing it. But the first step is I want you to step into the water. Most of you, you're not going to conquer, you're not going to inhabit everything up front because you couldn't handle it. In fact, the Bible talks about that. He says, hey, I couldn't give you the whole land. I couldn't wipe out everybody in front of you because the wild animals will come and kill you all. Read it. That's what it says. So he already had even the steps. He said, look, if I wipe out all these other people, who are the other people? Who are the wild animals going to eat? They're just going to eat you. He had a plan. How many of you would have thought about the wild animals? You wouldn't have thought that way, but God knew. So number one, you need to ask, God, what is my part? What is my step today? Again, don't worry about it from a year about right now. Just make sure you know what today's step is. You need to know what I need to do in this moment, what I need to be praying about in this moment. I need to be understanding what you're saying to me right now. I don't want, God, I'll be obedient in the future, but right now, what are you speaking to me right now? What is my part right now? And if God has given you a land, he'll tell you what that part is. He'll show you what your next step is. For some of you, it's just taking that first step into the water, and some of you may take the first step and you go, whoop, But you have to trust that his presence is holding you up. Number 2, in the scripture we read earlier, it says, consecrate yourselves. How many of you know that God is not going to allow you to go to a new level in him carrying a whole bunch of baggage and trash with you? I'm going to say that over here. God's not going to allow you to go to a new level carrying the same garbage that you've been carrying the rest of your life or your whole life with. He wants you to let go of those kind of things. He wants you to let go of those kind of things. So I'll put on there, consecrate yourselves. Remove the things that would bring separation between you and God. The first thing they do before they even sent the presents in, they said, hey, get rid of all this stuff. Can I be honest with you? I always preach this message before when I went down. I said there was Jacob messed it up for all of us. Because Jacob had a great thing before he became Israel and God renamed him Israel. He had a great thing going and God said, hey, consecrate yourselves because I want to do something with you and your country. But let's just be honest with you. Jacob, he did consecrate himself. He told all the people, bring me all of your idols. Bring me all of the things that are keeping you from me. Idol worship. And this is what Jacob did. He took all of them and he buried them under the oak at Shechem. He buried them under this oak. Why would you bury something underneath the biggest tree in Shechem? Because you always know where you can go back and pick those bad boys up. Because for Jacob, those were not just images made out of wood or different things that matter. You're talking about idols that were made out of gold and precious stones and silver and all these kind of things. And so even in Jacob's life, in the back of his mind thinking, well, I'm going to consecrate myself so I can get what I need out of God for this moment. And yet I'm going to still know where I can back it up because I'm going to bury them right here under this big tree at Shechem. What did Israel deal with most of their lives? Why did they keep going back and back and back and back to? Idol worship, adultery. Throwing their things out to. What if Jacob would have taken those things and destroyed them, burned them, made them where there was no more, grind them into dust? Nobody else from generations beyond him could have went back and picked them up from under that tree. If you want to go to a new level, don't just consecrate yourself just for just a moment in your life, just so you can see what God could do, so he can bless you one more time. And knowing back in your mind, I know exactly if this doesn't work out, I'm going to go back and I know I can pick up my old life if I need to. I know where I can pick those things back up. It's time, like Paul said to those people on the boat, he said it's time that we cut the rescue boats off. Let's just cut them loose. Let the lifeboats just go from our lives and say, God, I'm just going to trust in your presence is going to take me to where I need to go. I only have one ship, it's you. I'm only going to put my faith into one thing, and it's you. I don't want to have any other lifelines. I don't want to have any boats or lifeboats in my life. I say, God, I want to cut them loose that I trust totally into you. Some of you have a backup plan, and God's saying, that doesn't take faith if you're always willing to fall back. Faith saying, I'm only going one way, and I'm going with you, Father. I'm leaving the rest behind. Consecrate yourselves. Drop what is in your hands except for what he's told you to take. Sometimes he'll tell you to take some things along the way, but make sure it's the things that he told you to take. Every time, have you ever seen the space shuttle at NASA? How many of you know that when that space shuttle, we haven't seen one take off in a long time, but we know that when one of those takes off, how many of you know it has a ton of stuff with it? It has the big gas things and the big gas tanks. Do they use gas? It costs a lot right now. But they'll have all these tanks that they have, but as they start going higher and higher and higher, those things start dropping off, dropping off, and dropping off. See, the same things that got you to the place you are may not be the same things that when you get higher that you're going to need anymore. The same people who got you to a certain point in your life, and I'm not talking about using people, I'm just saying, but sometimes those people may not be around anymore because God used those for a certain point of your life. But when you get to where God wants you, there's a whole other thing. He's asking you to soar. And sometimes you just have to drop those things that are no longer needed to get where God wants you. Y'all with me still? Number 3, make sure you're carrying his presence. This is one of the most important things. Listen to what he wants you to do. Consecrate yourself, but make sure before you're going, you're thinking, well, how do I carry his presence? It means that you have to begin to spend time with him like you've never spent time with him before. It means that you have to know him. You have to get close to him. It means that you're saying, God, nothing else is important except for you. Moses did the same very thing back in Exodus chapter 33. Moses understood this in his life. He said, God, I'm not taking another step unless you go with me. What if we lived our lives like that every day, that we said, God, I'm not going to another place unless you go with me? I'm not taking another step, God. I'm not making another decision. I'm not making a small decision, a big decision. I'm not making any decision in my life unless your presence goes with me. When we get to that point in our lives, it says that once they consecrated themselves in the presence, it says in the scripture that we read earlier, it says, watch and see what I will do among you. You want to see miracles? You want to see those things that God's promised? Get close to him, because when you get close to him, those things happen, not because that's what we're seeking. I don't seek God because I want to see miracles. I seek God because I love him. And those things, it said, they shall follow. Carry his presence. Number 4, wait until he tells you to move. Sometimes we try to get ahead of God. Sometimes we want to lag behind. We want to see sort of what happens. But when he tells you to move, you wait for it. And when he tells you to move, you step. That's step number 5. You wait till he tells you to move, and when he tells you to move, you take a step. You take a step. That sounds so simple. Let me ask you this. How many of you have hesitated? How many of you are in a hesitation mode right now? God's been saying, look, I want to do something among you like you've never seen before. I want to do something in your life. I want to do something and you're at that hesitancy mode. Well, God, if I do that, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to change this part of my life. So I'm going to have to give up something. I'm going to have to. Are you willing to give it all to see what he will give it all? Because God wants to. He wants to do extraordinary things in your life. He wants to use you to do extraordinary things in his kingdom. Because in verse 5 it says, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you, but they had to get it right. They had to consecrate themselves. They had to know what their part was. They had to carry his presence, and then they had to move. I'm understanding more and more in my own life, especially in the days that we're living in right now, these times that we're living in right now. It doesn't do any good just to feel good anymore. It doesn't do any good to come to church and just feel good when we leave anymore, because we're living in crazy times. We're living in, some of you don't think so yet, but we are living in desperate times. There's just a couple of events that could happen right now, and if you keep up with the news, and like I said, you have to be very careful, but if you keep up with the truth in the news, there's only a couple of events that could happen right now that could change the whole face of our nation. But I understand this, even though these things are important, I understand that there's nothing that we can do to change anything except pray and ask for his presence. I cast my vote this election, and my vote, even though it was important, it didn't change everything I needed it to change. There's the causes that we cannot fix, a heart that will not change. There's a mind that cannot be set free. There's a body that cannot be healed. There's a country that cannot turn back to him unless his presence goes before us. You're thinking about, God, why do I keep going through these same things in my life over and over and over and over again? Why I keep wandering in the desert? When God in his word says that you can make streams in the desert and you can do these things and wells that you did not dig, I'm going to give you in places and stuff. And I'm not talking about financial blessings today. I'm talking about blessings that God is for your family and your friends and different other things. And you're seeing hearts change and minds change and healings and those things are set free. I'm talking about all these things, being closer to God than you've ever been. You're thinking, why is that not happening? I'm asking, have you put his presence first? Have you consecrated yourself? Have you sought him? Have you put your foot in the water? Saying, I'm God, I'm willing to do what you've asked me to do and go where you've asked me to go. Because he wants to do those great things among you. So this morning I ask you, where is God taking you? Where is God asking you to go? Some of you need to go back, we've said this before, but you need to go back to the last thing he's asked you to do and be obedient there. And he'll give you something new. Some of you, the reason you're just wandering in the desert and you're just wondering what's going to happen, the reason that you're wandering is because you have not been obedient to the last thing he asked you to do. Because you thought that was too big and it was going to take too much sacrifice. So I'm just telling you, if you want to go further in your life, be obedient to that. Let his presence go before you in that obedience. I'm just being honest with you, when I have God's presence moving and functioning in my life, and I feel his presence strongly in my life, man, when he asks me to do something, I ain't gonna lie, sometimes I'll take a second look at it, but then I'm like, okay, God, I'm with you. But when I don't have his presence, man, those things look huge. Those things seem so hard because I don't have that peace and that rest in who he is. So what is God asking you to do today? What new ministry is he asking you to step out in? Maybe it's some of you, I've been so proud of y'all. We had a lot of visitors last Sunday, and I don't find satisfaction in numbers. I find satisfaction in souls. But the reason I'm so excited about some of y'all is because a lot of our visitors that we had come was because you invited them. As a pastor, that excites me so much. It's because you invited them. That's the way the church is supposed to grow, is because people get excited about what God's doing. And each one of us invite one. If everyone brought a visitor or invited somebody or won 5 people to Jesus this year, imagine how big churches in this area, not just our church, because I don't want just our church to grow. I want every church to grow. Every Bible-based church, I want it to grow. Imagine if every Christian won 5 people to Jesus this year. Some of you need faith to step out in that. Some of you are trying to start a new business. You're trying to go a different way and be in direction in life, and you're saying, I don't know how this is ever going to happen. I can't get the financing. I can't get this and this and this. Step into the water. Consecrate yourselves. Carry his presence. Cut the lifeboat and see what he'll do among you. Will you bow your heads today?